Welcome to week 7, which is the beginning of about 3 weeks or 3 modules about the real core of special education and the processes and labels and certifications and all the pieces and parts that go into that. I wanted to give you a little bit of introduction before we start to dig into this week's lecture, just to set you up for success, but also to make some connections. This next 3 weeks has a very heavy special education focus. And I tend to go to my special education world, and I'm really trying to make sure that I don't do that because I know that this is a course for general educators who are maybe new to special education, but for sure not having the same kinds of trainings and experiences that certified special educators do. So on one hand, give me a little bit of grace and ask me questions. On the other hand, for those, recognize the fact that many of you have really varied experiences in special education or with special education, from very beginnings to deep in inclusion and maybe some training. So I will be offering some choices in our reading materials and learning in the next couple of weeks, but I'll also be doing some more review and connecting over the next 3 weeks. With that, I want to talk a little bit about the reading and materials for this week. There are 2 short stories from yet another trade book, not a textbook. This is called Disability Visibility, and it is a section of short stories, excerpts from authors with disabilities. I've chosen 2 this week. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth with you, but I want you to read those and consider them from the perspective of someone with a label, good or bad, however you consider labels. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. The first one is an experience of a student in an art classroom that was labeled as ugly. As you read and you dig in, you find out they have a physical disability, a genetic disorder where they look physically different. The second excerpt is someone who is labeled as broken, and it is from the point of view of someone who is an individual who uses a wheelchair. I'd like you to dig in and consider those important perspectives from persons and authors with disabilities as we start to talk about educational disability categories. The other piece, other than our course text, but the other thing that I have you engage with is a TED Talk by someone an astronomer who goes blind over the course of her life and her career due to an illness. And I really want you to focus in on the perspective she shares as you watch her TED Talk. It's only about 10 minutes long. And really focus in when you hear her start to talk about people with disabilities being allowed in the scientific field. There is also a chapter or a story from her perspective in this book. It was based on that TED Talk, but I wanted you to see and hear that in a different way. Those very short 3 excerpts will kind of center what we're doing and what we're talking about from the perspective of someone with a disability. But I also want to acknowledge the current events that we're going through right now. The videos, the regulations, the laws, and the processes that I'm about to talk to you about in this module are very much in the news right now, and quite possibly changing, or something that we are going to need to advocate and help our students with disabilities continue to receive the same types of services and protections that they've received in the past. It is the Wild West in teacher certification in higher ed and in schools right now because of a teacher shortage, on top of the changes that are being proposed or not proposed in the federal government. So take that into consideration, but also reach out to me right away with questions. I have not put a lot of this into this week's lecture because things are changing so quickly. I will update you as needed. It is a 15-week course and we're only halfway through, so bear with me. I'm going to introduce the next couple of slides after you've taken just review the reading so that you know what's expected, and then work your way through these lecture and slides. I want to talk to you a little bit on the next slide about OSEP and MARS. I'm going to try to be really good about not throwing around a lot of shortened terms and acronyms. OSEP is the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal government. And that really has to do with IDEA, the federal law that lays out protection services and programs federally that then the states can determine. That's the bare minimum in the United States that we meet for special education. States can offer more, but not less than what OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, and IDEA, the law, lays out. MARS is Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education. That matches OSEP, and in some places, Michigan meets OSEP requirements, and in some cases, Michigan offers more. Very special ed language there, but just so you know federally where eligibility and diagnosis comes from our schools. This is the regulations and laws behind those initial IEPs you might attend. Then I'm going to get into a little bit more about eligibility and diagnosis. I have a chart from a parent resource that does a really good job. It's a circular cycle of explaining the cycle. It's kind of small on the slide, so I'll make sure when I talk about it to include the link. And while we're doing all of these things and considering all these things, I'd like you to really think about the language we're using and the labels we are literally placing on students. Think through your knowledge, think through your experiences in schools, and think about the pros and cons of those labels. Special education is a service that is limited only to students who are eligible through the assigning of a label. That doesn't say that in the law, but if we're realistic, that's how we need to accept that. We also have to look at the fact that certification for teachers puts labels on teachers, on programs, and doubles down on those labels on students. This is a struggle. It's a personal struggle for me. I've always struggled with the fact that a special ed teacher is a CI, a cognitive impaired teacher, for students with cognitive impairments, when I know in my heart that general education students and special education students need to be met where they are, and we need to base our services and our supports on student need. So it's a tough one. You'll find as you read through here, it's a lot of procedures, regulations, and laws that dictate how we do things and how we present things and how we provide services. It can get pretty gnarly and pretty bureaucratic and kind of complicated. So as this is presented, please reach out to me with questions. Please take this from your learning need, where you are. And if things get deep and you get confused, clarify, take a step back, dig back into your reading, and we'll move on from there. Again, enjoy, and I'll pop back on in a couple of slides to continue to connect and clarify.